Who had the greatest bicep development of all time? Today we're going to try to answer that. And we are narrowing in on the bicep alone. So we're not talking about who had the best forearm, who had the best tricep, because Roly Winkler, he may have had some of the best complete arms of all time. But for today's video, we are narrowing in on the bicep itself. And much like all of these videos, we are going to go back in time. And this guy has a good back too, but we are not talking about his back. This is, in fact, Melvin Wells, and he competed as far back as the 1940s. Take a look, if you will. I mean, he was impressive all over the place, but look at that bicep. That is mountainous. This bicep, this impresses me more than anybody on the Olympia stage nowadays. And keep in mind, guys, from 40, I think he competed in the late 40s all the way to 1954. And if you're going to go check this guy's pictures out, be careful because there's some nudes. But anyway, just a quick warning. This guy here also competed around the same time period, Leroy Colbert. And like I said, guys, hard to ignore the rest of the muscles, but just individualize that bicep alone. And there was probably not a whole lot of performance enhancers back then. So this is basically what you're looking at is a natural bicep peak. Now, I'm not saying he was 100% natural, but I'm sure, if the guy worked out diligently, he probably could have achieved this. I would be remiss to not mention Larry Scott. Might not be my favorite, personally. Doesn't have really that freaky, peaky bicep. But in terms of fullness, thickness, and size, Larry Scott most certainly should be mentioned in this video. And food for thought, the very first ever Mr. Olympia champion. Now, here's another pretty famous bodybuilder, Dave Draper. Didn't have the roundness and maybe the size of Larry Scott, but he had those freaky, peaky biceps that I favor. And I'm sure a lot of you guys do too. He was known for this mantis pose position, and it's, you could see the peaks on his biceps, even holding his arms halfway straight. Here's Bill Pettis, not very well known, but I'm here to tell you right now, for his time, this guy had some of the biggest, largest arms, and most of that was due to those freaky, peaky biceps. Here is Boyer Co. Sure many of you have heard of Boyer Co. Not the hugest in the world, but this guy had some strange details going through those arms. He had a split in those biceps. World class as well. Heart-shaped bicep. So Boyer Co., very underrated. But when it comes to biceps, bicep peaks, I mean, ever since I was a kid, seeing this guy in magazines, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he is incredible. And he, unlike a lot of the guys now, he had just one big, thick hose vein going through that arm. And I always thought that was aesthetically pleasing. I'm sure many women did too. But anyway, nobody is as iconic in those biceps as Arnold Schwarzenegger. A lot of it had to do with genetics, though, I am sure. Because there was a guy like this, Corny, he trained just like Arnold. He side by side, and you could do the same workouts. You're never going to achieve that size. But food for thought, Ed Corny did have some nice shaped bicep peaks. Maintained it throughout his career, too. Here's Bill Grant. And if he competed now, he would be accused of using sight enhancement oils. His arms are that big and full and round. Very impressive. Here is Albert Beckles. Nobody in the history of bodybuilding, whether you take today's guys or back in the silver era, has a more impressive bicep peak. This is a perfect heart-shaped peak from Albert Beckles. And not only is it impressive from the front, from behind it was equally as impressive. I mean, look at the detail. They talk about sight enhancements. I mean, there's no sights in this bicep. Is this photoshopped or isn't it? It looks like Louis Marco coined this phrase, it looks like a bicep erection is exactly what it looks like. My soul, I would like to see somebody today on today's stage pull a maneuver off like that. Of course, Albert Beckles was not met without competition back then, the 80s. This is, of course, my favorite bodybuilder of all time, Robbie Robinson. And talk about heart-shaped bicep. Wow, wow. And I'm sure most people will agree that Robbie Robinson, he would be on a lot of people's lists of the best biceps. If you individualize the bicep alone, best bicep peaks of all time. Is he my favorite? Do I think that he has the best bicep of all time? Well, he's matching up with the best of the best. I'll probably let you know at the very end who I think has the best. Here is Brutal Bertil Fox. Definitely worth the mention. Heart-shaped biceps. Huge set of guns. A lot of that has to do with the biceps. Now here is Edward Kowak. Maybe not the best in the world, but worth the mention. As well as this guy, Lance Dreyer. Check out the peak on him. Here is Roy Callender, and if you take a look at his biceps, he was probably the best in the 1981 Mr. Olympia event as far as the bicep peaks are concerned. Check out this guy, Charles Claremont. If you've never realized how good his biceps were, wow, fantastic. It really helped out with that world-class front double bicep pose. And here's another very aesthetically pleasing bodybuilder at Thierry Pastel. It seems to be a thing. You know, good bicep peaks are an ingredient of an aesthetic physique. Here's Brian Buchanan. Look at the mountainous bicep peaks on this man. Those peaks, those arms truly made his waistline look even smaller. What a wow factor that this guy had. Here's Vince Taylor. Hard to find a good, flattering picture of those biceps. The video footage does him more justice. He had some very incredible biceps. Now, when you get into the 1990s, it gets a little bit iffy. You have Mike Matarazzo here, and his arms were mind-blowing. And I'm talking mind-blowing. A lot of people say he had some sights in there. And speaking of sights, I mean, he was in between so much oil at certain situations that a guy with weak biceps, in Milo Sarchev, he was actually dwarfing him in that aspect. So it was kind of a joke, to be honest with you. But I truly believe if you took everything out of the equation, you know, extracurricular drugs, things of that nature, in oil, of course, I think Mike Matarazzo still would have had some of the best biceps of all time. Of course, the same could be said about Gunter Schlierkamp. Check out the Arnold Schwarzenegger peaks on this guy. Very impressive, very impressive. Keep in mind, he was 6'2"? So they would have been actually mountainous. And look at another German dude. Look at this guy. Must be a thing about Germans and Austrians. Look at Marcus Rule. He also, much like Gunter Schlierkamp and Arnold, had a perfect peak. And coupled with that mass, this is truly, arguably, the two biggest and best biceps of all time. Hey, who put this guy's picture in here? This is Scott Steiner, Big Papa Pump. Holla, if you hear me. He had some pretty good peaks for a wrestler, Here's Derham Charles. Have you ever seen Derham Charles's bicep peaks? Holy cow. Talk about peeled, chiseled. They are definitely chiseled. Jay Cutler. What about Jay Cutler? He definitely should be mentioned. Not really known for his biceps, but clearly the guy had some guns. He did tear one of his biceps at one point in time, so one was bigger than the other. But he was always standing next to this guy here, Ronnie King Coleman. This is King Coleman earlier on in his career. So I wager to say, for a natural bicep itself, I'm not saying he's natural, but I'm just saying, you know, if he was, this bicep peak here has every right to boast about being the, you know, the best of all time. Of course, he did grow that baby in the gym and gave it some technologies proper, and it grew and grew. But you know what? Was not as symmetrical as it was at the dawn or at the beginning of his career. Now, I'd be remiss not to mention this guy. This is, of course, Victor Martinez. And definitely not the detail of some guys, but they were huge. Dexter the Blade Jackson standing right next to him, usually. And he had more of an impressive bicep peak the Victor Martinez. In my opinion, that is. Just more detail. Of course, Kai Green, he was standing next to both of those guys, and he may have had the best bicep peaks of the mid-2000s, I guess. But then again, guys, if you've never really taken a close look at Phil Heath's, he arguably had just as good or better bicep peaks than our friend Kai Green. And he maintained those peaks too, guys. Gotta give Phil Heath respect. Gotta give him credit. He was even defeating Brandon Curry. And there you go, Brandon Curry gets a mention. But clearly he was not as good as Phil Heath, in my opinion. And another guy, too, that still competes is William Bonak. And he has some mind-blowing cannonballs. And I began the video, of course, by showing Robbie Winkler. Now, yeah, Robbie Winkler, he might have better arms altogether. But in my opinion, and I'm sure the opinion of all you guys, he has a better bicep peak if you individualize the peak itself. So there you go, William Bonak. And here you go, Max Charles. If you've never realized how good Max Charles was in this muscle group, take a look. Little earlier on in his career. And this guy here, look at the size of the beast, Akeem Williams' biceps. Maybe photoshopped. Of course, on stage, he looks pretty gosh darn big in that aspect as well. Of course, he has some accusations slung at him in the last little while about some sites, and that kind of makes it a little bit more difficult to narrow down on the best of the current biceps. Blessing Awadibu, another one, should be mentioned, as well as this guy, Andrew Jacked. And I'm sure there are more, but like I said, guys, with the sites, things of that nature, it's hard to pinpoint it. But we definitely should mention and give respect to our president, our champion, our Mr. Olympia champion. Kudos, Big Ramy, Momdels Bae, for your impressive bicep peaks. So who had the greatest of all time? And somebody that I perhaps mentioned already? Well, Lee Priest. If you'd never realized Lee Priest, he might have a heck of a complete set of arms. But if you individualize that bicep alone, I mean, look at them arms, mate. No wonder I'm from down under. But anyway, Lee Priest, arguably the best of all time. And then there is this guy, Marco Savalainen. I am sure most people have been thinking about this guy the entire video. His biceps were so huge. I mean, is this real? Is this legit? A lot of people would point the finger of blame to site enhancements, oils, things of that nature. And I'm not saying he wasn't. I'm not saying he was. All I'm saying is that is one mountainous bicep. But I guess if you're gonna take into consideration sites and things of that nature, if you want to know the true best bicep of all time, Arnold Schwarzenegger. In my opinion, he is the best, or he has the greatest bicep peaks in bodybuilding history. Whether you think of him as a golden era athlete or a current athlete, I mean, this guy could pop those biceps at any angle, and probably at any time too. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Arnold, not only the best, but maybe the most famous bicep peaks of all time as well. Hope you enjoyed this one, guys, because I know I definitely enjoyed setting it up, looking at all these guns. Think I might go do a workout, a bicep workout. Alright guys, that's it for now. Subscribe to the channel, hit thumbs up on the video. Have a great one.